sharing the screen. Going to click the option for share sound, and we hope it will work. Right. Okay, can everybody see PowerPoint?
Yes, Prof.
Yes, Prof.
Thank you. Okay, some of you may have heard this before, but I have tried to update it with new thoughts and new suggestions. This basically is what we are talking about. Using a reference manager, I'm going to spend quite a lot of time on that. Building your own library. Understanding the purpose of referencing, some of you will have heard that. Selecting the right references. Serious advice, if not a plea, to reference as you write from the first draft and not as an afterthought later. And advice on updating and correcting your library as you go. And the final word is just a comment on author date referencing. Right. So we're going to start by talking about using a reference manager. The one I use is EndNote because that's what the university subscribes to and makes available to us. And I certainly find it one of the most useful, powerful tools that I've ever used in my research career. The other one, funny enough, is a dictation software so that I can speak to my computer instead of having to type, which is very, very much faster. But today we're speaking about using a reference manager, and I'll be demonstrating EndNote. The other one that's quite commonly used is Mendeley, which is a sort of a more private, I think, open source type thing. And it'll be similar, but I am not particularly, or in fact, I know very little about how actually to use it. But what I can say is it is powerful and it does work. And it doesn't really matter which one you use, but you really must use one. Now, to be honest, they're not all that intuitive when you first start. There is a learning curve, but it's not too difficult to adapt to using it in a fairly basic fashion. And that in its own right is powerful enough. But it really is worth learning some of its tricks and some of its possibilities to get better at it. The main one really is how to adjust the way it inserts references, where the commas are, where the italics are, where the full stops are, and so on, which can be done in a thing called Output Style Manager. That really is for people who want to learn a bit more and who are prepared to play around and learn and make some mistakes in the process of learning how to do it. But it's not too difficult just to learn to use it day to day. And I can't stress enough the importance of it. Well, why? Basically, research, writing of papers, writing of thesis, we all know that it requires an awful lot of reading, repeatedly reading what you had read before and referencing. And hence my advice, get smart. Okay, it's very important so you're going to be spending certainly the next few years, if not the rest of your life, doing this over and over and over. It makes sense to invest in the time and effort to use this incredibly powerful labor-saving device. Right. So the first purpose of our software is to write our papers and our thesis. And as you can see, here's a paper I wrote some years ago, and it's full of references all over the page. And this is just one page out of 30 or 40. It was a very long discussion article. So, a couple of points. First, it would have taken ages and ages and ages to actually type those things in. Secondly, it's almost inevitable that if I typed them, I would have had some typos and some misspellings of names and things. Thirdly, there's an awful lot of repetition. There's Van der Vleuten and Schuworth 2005. There they are again. So what an absolute waste, over and over and over, to type the same thing, each time with the very real chance of making a mistake and putting in a typo. And there's the whole issue at the end of it of having to type all of them in again at the end in the references or bibliography. And then that horrible problem of what happens when you change or remove or insert just one reference. If you're using a numbered format, the number for every single one changes. That's a nightmare. It'll take you hours to put it right. And once again, there's a huge opportunity for error to creep in. Right. So the multiple advantages of using referencing software. This is my first screen animation. It's actually a sort of video done in PowerPoint of my screen as I went through an illustrative example of using EndNote to write a paper. So I'm going to set it. It's got voiceover. Perhaps somebody could let me know whether they can hear anything. If they can, that's great. If not, well, then I can just sort of comment as we go. Right, so let me start this thing.
Here is a brief demonstration of just how useful referencing software is. On the left.
Can everybody hear that?
Yes, Prof.
Yes, Prof.
Yes,
Right.
Prof.
Glad to hear it. Let's carry on.
I have a short document which requires referencing, and on the right I've opened my EndNote, the reference software manager which I use. I've actually got something over 6,000 references in this reference manager at the moment. This is my own personal library of references that I've gathered over the years. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I've subtracted or extracted just a small subset, which are the ones that we are going to use. Right, so let's go to the document on the left. Now, just to point out that I have cheated just a little for the purposes of the demonstration, I have made just a little note to myself of which reference I want to go where. If you were referencing a genuine document, of course, you wouldn't have that little clue. You would have to read through it, decide on a point that needs a reference, and then insert the appropriate reference. So let's begin. Reading through the first sentence, I decide that this statement does require referencing, and I know that Norsini would be a good reference to use. So I move across to my EndNote. There's Norsini. If I were to open it up, you would see that that entry contains the full reference. There's the title, there are the authors, there's the journal, year, volume, issue, pages, etc., and even a link to the actual article. Right, so that clearly is the one I want to use. Having selected it, I press insert, and there it is. So we carry on. The next person I want to reference is Yerkes. Okay. So there we find a study of the pig. I have to read which of these two references by Yerkes is the appropriate one. And in he goes. I see we actually want to reference Coburn as well. Select him. And in he goes. And here, in actual fact, we want to insert two references, Brown and Yerkes. I can do them separately, but I can, in fact, select them both and insert them both at one go. And so we keep on moving through the document. Here's a gentleman called Davidson that needs referencing. Actually, I see it's a lady called Davidson. And there she is. This one requires multiple references, not a problem. Fredrickson, Guthrie, Nickerson, and in they go. There's actually, as you can see, also no problem with repeating references. There's no worry that when you type it out the second time, you might misspell it compared to the first time. It's going in as a single block from the library on the right-hand side. So as long as it's spelt right there, it will always be spelled right in your document. And the final reference is Bridgman. And in goes Bridgman and Morgan. Right, so adding these references has been a very quick, simple process. If we look down, we'll find some more magic. EndNote has actually added the references to the list of references at the end of the document, the bibliography. I didn't have to do anything. There it all is, and it's set according to the format that I have chosen for it. And because I'm using author date here, you'll see that it has automatically put things into alphabetical order. No effort required on my part. But that's not the end of the magic. As you know, many of the journals we use want different formats for their references. A common one is to put a number in brackets. I've selected that in the EndNote tab of my Word document, and there it is. Every single one is changed to a number, and the references are all still here, but you'll see that the order is changed so that they are now ordered by number and not alphabetically. Some journals in your manuscript want square brackets, and there we are. Our numbers are in square brackets. And of course, when finally printed, the Vancouver format requires numbers in superscript. A click of the button, and there it is. Absolutely no effort required to change formats from the one to the other. But here is something else that is really, really useful. Let me go back to the format where I used the name of the author and the year in the text. You'll see that Norsini et al. Was number 1. What I'm going to do is take a different sentence and move that up to the start. That's something we often do. Right. So the references are in different order. That doesn't matter with author date, but if I do go for a number format, you will see that it's automatically renumbered everything. So that Coburn, who used to be number 5 or so previously, is now number 1. And Norsini, who used to be number 1, is now number 6. So EndNote has automatically reordered the numbers so that everything fits. This is a huge saving in time. It's also a huge saving in stress and error. If you have manually attempted to reference a document with maybe 60 or 70 numbered references, and you decide to insert or delete a single reference somewhere near the start, then you're going to have to move through every single reference in your text, manually changing its number. Not only will that take forever, but there is such a huge risk of introducing error. Here we are. Let's say, for example, that we decide to take the Coburn reference out. Let's delete him. No problem. The next reference has now become number 1, and everything else has moved up. Just to say too that this is completely customizable, and I'm also able to change exactly how the references appear in the bibliography. For example, you'll know that some journals want the names of all authors, some journals want the names of 3 authors followed by et al. Other journals want the names of 5 authors followed by et al. EndNote can do all of this automatically for you. Here is a brief demonstration. Here is a brief demonstration of
Right, thanks. Can you all hear me again? Has the sound gone back to my microphone?
Yes, Prof.
Right, thanks. That worked better than expected. All right. So the first thing we've talked about is how useful something like EndNote is for the actual referencing of your papers. The second extremely useful thing is as a library of all your references, including abstracts and including full texts. In my younger days, you could see how clever a scientist is by walking into his or her office. If there was nowhere to sit, because there were piles and piles and piles and piles of printouts and photocopies of journals and journal articles all over the desk, all over the floor, all over the chairs, all over the windowsill, then you knew you were in the presence of a great man or a great woman. But this is really absolutely not so anymore. And I'm sure if you walk into the office of most modern researchers, you'll be lucky to find a single article lying on the table. The rest will all be electronically stored in a thing such as EndNote. Right. You saw me using the screen earlier. Here we are. Here's my EndNote library main screen. And you can see over 6,000 references, which I can search for in any number of ways, and I can order by year, by date, by title, by journal, by first author, etc., etc. And there is, of course, up at the top, a search button. So if I want to find that article by Norsini, all I have to go to the top is type first author contains Norsini, hit enter, and it will whip me straight down to the Norsini entry. In the old days, again, two things happened. Some researchers were somewhat obsessive compulsive and had filing cabinets labeled A to C, D to F, G to H, and so on. And they would, riffle through the filing cabinet to find that Norsini article for you, and then you were suitably impressed. Others would spend hours riffling through piles and piles of papers on the desk, apologizing for the fact that they know that it is there somewhere. Once again, absolutely not necessary. All you have to do is search Norsini, click on it. There is the Norsini paper, and quite likely the full text of the paper as well, as I'll show you just now. So that brings us to the issue of building your own library. And it's never too soon to start. When you do your concept sheet, before your protocol, one of the first skills to master is how to use EndNote so that you can start saving your references right from the start, if not from day one, but at least from week 2 or week 3. So this is how to manage references. 1, read, obviously. If you're not reading, you won't have references to collect. The second is to collect references as you go. I'll be demonstrating this in a second. Read an article, you like it, you think you're going to want to refer to it, reference it, or return to it later. Save it in your reference manager there and then. Collect references as you go. You all know the limits of human good intentions. You'll mean to return to it later, to save it, and you won't. Worse still, you'll remember later that there was something you wanted to save, and you won't be able to remember what it was, who the actual author was, let alone where to find it again. Right, so save them in your reference manager, and if possible, save them with the full text, wherever possible. The equivalent of putting that actual photocopy in your filing cabinet. Right. So that means that we can obtain full text articles. And I must say, it's getting better all the time. When I search for journals now, I would guess that I can probably access about 70 to 75% of the papers I want to read. I can actually find the full text via the UKZN library. Okay. Some of them because they're open source, and others because the library has actually subscribed. Increasingly, they don't subscribe to journals, they subscribe to the big publishing houses who then make all their journals available. This does require, however, that either you're on the university land, so that the PubMed, whoever it is, recognizes that you are licensed to read this paper, or if you're off campus, you have to load that VPN, virtual private network. It's a little bit of software. Global VPN is what UKZN uses. And when it's on, it tells whoever needs to know, whichever website needs to know, that it's actually coming from a UKZN approved computer. And then that gives you these same privileges. Otherwise, you'll frequently find that you'll find an article and you'll be very disappointed. This is when you work from home, for example, that you can't get the full text. You then switch on, load up, and connect via that VPN, and magically, the full text is now available. This is because the publisher has now been reassured that you are licensed by UKZN to use their facilities. There are all sorts of tricks. I'm not going to talk about literature review today, but I have definitely found that using different search engines sometimes picks up things that anyone on its own doesn't. Google Scholar may add something over PubMed. Academic Search Complete may add more. And certainly if you're sort of wandering off the biomedical, if you're getting into education and sociology and things like that, then you'll want to use EBSCOhost or Academic Search Complete, which survey the entire, as does Google Scholar, the entire field of scholarly knowledge, and not just the stuff that PubMed has decided has something to do with medicine. Sometimes I find that searching in Google throws up things that Google Scholar doesn't. For example, it'll pick up the cheats, where authors have made their own paper available on their university departmental website, as opposed to it being available to the academic community via some sort of academic software. Or, I know it's very naughty, but sometimes you'll find that some other person has gone and taken a paper and made it available. Don't ask too closely whether they actually had the right to do so or not. But not infrequently, I find with a clever Google search will turn up the actual documents that may not have been available when you use Google Scholar and found the reference, but not the full text. Sometimes, I've never understood why, you'll find that it doesn't appear to be available on your PubMed search, but if you actually log into the university library site and go through their list of journals, you can actually find it. Okay, and of course, there's always the possibility to ask a friend at another university if they can't access it and send it to you. Or very old-fashioned these days, you can write to the authors and ask for a copy of their journal. And similarly, if you use ResearchGate, it's often got a facility for you to send a message to a specific member of ResearchGate saying, please may I have a copy of this article. So if you are really, can I say, either keen or desperate enough to get a specific article, don't give up too quickly. You'd be surprised how often you can find it by resorting to these tricks. And if necessary, well, you've always got the option of writing to the authors for it. The next thing is update and correct your library as you go. Okay. Inevitably, you'll find errors in the references you download from the internet. In the old days, some person was actually sitting somewhere typing them all in. I guess these days it's all automated, but it's not unusual for the reference that PubMed provides to your EndNote, in fact, to have errors. Okay. In fact, there was a humorous one. A colleague of ours called Professor Rock, who's an anaesthetist, wrote an article about the need for the medical postgraduates, the MEd students, to do research. I was a co-author with a couple of others, and he started off with a reference, a quote about a Captain Jack Sprat, who apparently is some well-known pirate and figure of literature. And believe it or not, our article appeared in the literature as Sprat, J et al. Okay, so that software had really confused it, and it put this mythical figure of legend, who happened to be the first words in the paper, as the authors of the paper. So that's a rather extreme case, but you'll find that all the time, and you need to then manually correct it in your reference manager, which you can do. And after that, for the rest of time, the reference will be correct in your EndNote. And every time you use it, the correct reference will go in, and not the faulty reference that PubMed provided to you, right? So if you don't do that, well, then every time you update the manuscript, the error will reappear. And also every time you write a paper subsequently, it'll reappear. And if you've got a reviewer or an examiner who actually takes their job extremely seriously, as some do, they will pick this up. They will know that it's a faulty reference, and they will know that that means that you probably didn't actually read the paper. You just stuck in the reference and then allowed EndNote to insert it somewhere in your paper. So beware. Right. So we're now going to move to another little of those screen show demonstrations of efficient routines for finding and saving references. And this is the one that I've perfected for myself. So let's have a look.
What I want to do now is find relevant references on a database, such as PubMed, which I have open on the left here, and get them into my EndNote, which I have on the right. This is obviously something we have to do from time to time as we find all the articles, books, whatever may be necessary to read in order to write our paper or thesis and to insert as references. It's also something that we have to do from time to time just to keep up with the subject by looking to see what has been written in the last week or the last month or the last 3 months, or whatever it may be. So in this case, I'm going to look up to see what's been written recently on variegate porphyria, a disease that I've spent much of my life studying, and on the subject of which I got my own PhD. So I'll do the search in PubMed, and I find there are a number of articles. I can now read through them and decide which ones are of reference to me. This, of course, is just standard practice in appraising the literature. The first one I know from experience will not be, it appears to be an article written by people I don't know, which will probably quote other experts and myself, rather than telling us anything that we don't know already. Well, the second one I definitely know is interesting because, in fact, I was one of the authors on it. A group of us got together and agreed on key terms and definitions to be used in trials and descriptions in future. So, since that's interesting, I'll open it. I can read the abstract. And now I'm going to cite it. That brings up a citation, which I can download in this particular format, which EndNote will import. So I've clicked on it, and there we are. EndNote has now imported it. If I look up here, I'll find it's the latest of all my references. If I click on it, I will see that all the detail needed for referencing is there, the journal, volume, year, etc., etc. In fact, this one has not yet published except online, so the journal volume is still awaited. But now obviously it would be nice to have the full text as well. Wiley has made the full text available. I can actually open it as a PDF and read it. And in fact, I can actually get it into my EndNote. Now this is a little bit variable. Sometimes EndNote seems to import it automatically as soon as it detects it. On other times you have to help it. In this case I'm going to ask it to find full text. And there it is. If I double click on this article now, I'll in fact find that the PDF has been attached to it and is always available to me for reading or for printing out, sharing if necessary. So, one paper down. Let's go back to our list. American Gastroenterological Association Clinical Practice Update on Diagnosis and Management of Porphyrias, Expert Review. Now I know all of these people and they are all leaders in the field. In fact, I met Bruce Wang down in Cape Town at a conference a couple of weeks ago. So we will most certainly look that one up. I will cite it, download the reference, double click to open it, and there it is. It's appeared in my EndNote. Now see, the full text is available. So let's open that. There we are. Let me view it as a PDF. Going to my EndNote, I'm just going to encourage it to find that full text. And we'll see what happens. If we're lucky, the full text will appear there, and if it doesn't, there are some manual workarounds that I can actually use to get it to do so. It does sometimes take just a little while to appear. Let me do it again. And we'll see what happens. But there I've now added 2 recent references to my EndNote, and they're available to me immediately to use however I need to do so. Right. A little trick I've discovered is that sometimes if we actually download the PDF, then EndNote will be able to find it more easily. And there we are, it's done it. If we open it, we'll see that the PDF is actually attached to it. Right, so it's as simple as that. I can carry on doing that until I've finished all the reading that I want to do, and it's now all in my EndNote. Here's one more that's particularly interesting. Let me do this one. Okay, I'm going to cite it, download the reference, open the reference in EndNote. There it is. Let me open the full text links. Open it as a PDF. There it is. I'll download it as a PDF. And let me encourage EndNote to find it and attach it. And there it is. It's now been attached as a PDF to EndNote, as you can see. Right, so that process continues until I've finished all of my reading. But just to make the point, my EndNote library has been updated. There are the 3 most recent things. At any stage, I can decide to go and have a look at the PDF. If I don't want to read it in EndNote, well, then I can actually open it in any other PDF reader, such as my Foxit Reader PDF, and I can print it. What I want to do now is find relevant references on a database, such as PubMed, which I have open on the left here, and get them into my EndNote, which I have on the right. This is obviously something we have. And now that the references are in our EndNote database, they are immediately available to be used in our writing. So let's start writing a paper. I'm sure that Wang et al. Would be a very suitable reference for that. There it is. That would be this paper. And there we are.
Right. Sorry, I stopped. Hello, I lost connection for a second. Have you all still got me?
Yes, Prof.
Right, thanks. Let's go back to sharing my screen. Right. Okay. So I hope you're convinced how useful it is to use something like EndNote to store all your references and to insert all your referencing in your writing. And you've seen how, as you read, you can get in the habit of immediately importing those references plus the PDF into your EndNote. And you can, in fact, there and then, if you're working on a document, insert it directly into the paper you are writing. You might, for example, decide as you're writing, here is a point that really needs to be referenced. You may not be quite aware of what the best reference is. You might decide you want a recent one. So you can, without closing the Word document, Open another window with Google Scholar or PubMed, do a search, find just the reference that will do the trick, import it into EndNote, preferably bring its PDF so that you can read the article and make sure you're not misquoting it. And there and then you can insert it into Word, and then you can carry on writing the next sentence in your Word. The two can be seamlessly harmonized. It's not necessary to see them as two completely separate things to be undertaken. Right. Next bits of advice: reference properly, reference carefully, reference from the outset. Okay. Here are two good reasons to start referencing from the start. As you saw me do on that little screen video, I started writing my little paper, and the references went in as I was writing the paper. Don't, as I've said in the last sentence on this slide, don't write and then look for some reference to support your writing afterwards. There are two things. Firstly, conceptually, I mean, the direction of the scientific argument. We argue from what is known to whatever it is you wish to contribute. So in fact, if you're referencing backwards, you're doing that the wrong way around. You're stating what we wish to contribute and then going back in the hope of finding something that is known that will support it. Okay? References constitute the literature. The literature constitutes what is known, and you base what you're writing on what is known. So the direction of the scientific argument should be from what the literature supports, as proven by the references which you provide there and then, and proceeds to whatever it is you want to say. So, logically, conceptually, the direction is to write the reference and then continue to what you want to say, and not the other way around. Okay. There's practically another very good reason from this. If you reference appropriately from the start, the references are there. There's no problem. What I have found with some of the students who are perhaps just a little less organized about this, that we waste hundreds of hours tracking down papers. Okay? That student knows that there is a paper that says exactly what it is that they want to reference, and they know that it must go in this point in the document, but they cannot remember the authors, they cannot remember the title, and now we start a search wasting hours that could be spent on something better, trying to find what that reference was. And if they had only just inserted it when they wrote it, we would not have had that problem. So this is rather tongue-in-cheek, and I've put everything together on one paragraph, but this is exactly what happens. There's no exaggeration. Right. The student at least didn't just leave the thing unreferenced. They wrote little memos to themselves, what reference should go in there, but they didn't insert it there and then. So this is what they bring to me, and we sit down, and I'm so pleased to see that the referencing won't take long. And then this happens. We can't find P. Jonathan. And after searching and searching, we actually discovered that it actually wasn't P. Jonathan, it was J. Philip. It wasn't Philip Jonathan, it was Jonathan Philip. So we've been searching and searching for Jonathan. We should have been searching for the surname Philip. Okay? The student just had a mental crossing of wires when they wrote P. Jonathan. We search and search and search for Harris 1995. And the reason we can't find it is, unfortunately, the student misremembered it. It was Harris 1990-93. So we've wasted hours searching through all the Harrises in 1995 on PubMed. Wrong year. Then Harris is a famous person, so the student has remembered the Harris article on viremia, but the trouble is Harris wasn't actually the first author. May have been his or her group, but some other author is the first author. So when we start searching for Harris, we can't only search on first author Harris, we have to now search on every single article ever published that has got a Harris as an author, second author or third author or fourth author or whatever it may be. So we lose out on that one. Then we've got the famous Smith reference. So we do a search for Smith and we find there are 216,826 entries with Smith in PubMed. But where on earth do we start trying to find which Smith reference the student meant? And then there's the most famous one of all. Student says, I know I read a good article on this, and they're banging their head on the wall. They can't remember the name, can't remember the title, can't remember the year. So how on earth do we start tracking down what she or he knows is an excellent reference? If only they had inserted it there and then, preferably with EndNote. If they really, for some reason, couldn't use EndNote, they should at least have informally written in the surname, the first name, the year, the journal, or just something that makes it actually possible to track it down later. All of the things that I've demonstrated on this page I've seen, and all of them have wasted hours of everybody's time, myself included. Right. Integrating writing, reading, and saving references. I've mentioned this earlier. So you are busy writing, you're a quarter of the way through your paper. You find you need to look something up, or you need to obtain a reference to a point you've made. So you can pause the paper, search and find the relevant papers in another window, Google or PubMed or whatever it is, read and evaluate. If you like it, you can add it to Reference Manager. You can add the PDF to your Reference Manager. You can go back to the Word, insert those references there and then. And it's there for good, and it's correct. It's 100% accurate. There's no scratching your head the next day or the day after that and trying to remember what the reference was that you found that would have been a good one to put there. And my final point really is a very strong recommendation. Work with author date referencing. Leave the numbering as the very last step. I've shown you from my examples how easy it is to use author date referencing on EndNote in your paper. And final last step before submitting the journal to the journal uploading, you can click a button and all of those names will be replaced by numbers. Leave it for the end. This is a somewhat embarrassing mistake that I actually made myself. EndNote is pretty stable now, but some of the earlier versions did occasionally completely jumble up all the references, and this was such a case. This is what I wrote, genuinely. The issue of format has been addressed, and a recent publication suggests that multiple choice format quizzing is effective as short answer question quizzing, reference 21. I didn't pick it up. A very puzzled reviewer said nice things about my paper, but asked, had I really got my references in the right order? And to my horror, the so-called recent publication, reference number 21, turned out to refer to 1915. Yerkes and Coburn were the first people to employ multiple choice type questions, and believe it or not, they tried it out on pigs and crows. In the case of crows, crows had to peck on a particular button to get a treat. They were offered 4 buttons and they had to peck on one of them. And that led them to think about for doing the same for humans, using one of 4 things that had to be selected in order to complete a task. But there it was. So I had stated that a recent publication and then quoted 1915. And of course it was wrong. But the point is, when you read that sentence, nothing stands out as being wrong. Had I had it, at least while I was editing it myself in author date format, I would have seen, hang on, recent publication, 1915. What on earth has gone wrong here? Is it me? Is it EndNote? But quite clearly, something has gone wrong. It should have read a recent publication, McDermott et al. 2014. When I read through that, there would have been no red flags, not only because of the date, but also because when I read McDermott et al., it will bring something to mind. Probably, if I worked hard on this review paper, I know something about what McDermott wrote about. And I'll know whether it's true or not, that they suggested that short, MCQ is effective as some other format. Well, I'll say, hang on, I don't remember McDermott being the people that said that. So if you use this author date format, it's far easier to follow the arguments, to make sure you are using the right references in the right places. And for somebody such as your supervisor, who may not know the literature quite as well as you do, that particular literature you're using, they quickly get in the line of realizing that McDermott is an important person in this field, and this is the sort of thing that McDermott writes about. And even if they don't know every single paper off by heart, they will pick up when you seem to be on the right track with your references, and when you seem to be straying and using references inappropriately. They'll say, hang on, you know more about this than me, but the McDermott articles that you've given me to read, they didn't seem to be interested in this sort of thing at all. Are you sure you're quoting McDermott correctly? And often it turns out that the student is not. Right. So here's another example. Read this. The reference numbers are utterly incomprehensible, if you could call it that in their own right. They mean nothing. Okay? I would learn nothing about the important people in the field by looking at this, short of going to all the trouble of looking up every single reference in the bibliography at the end. Imagine the student presents it to me like this. Oh, Doyle and Garetti. Gallant, hang on. Can't you find a more recent reference than 2007? Surely somebody must have written something since then. Sorsted? Okay. Tobin, 2005? Again, is that really the best reference? 20 years old? Nothing better? Gandhi et al. 2017? Oh, okay, I remember that we discussed that at our last meeting. That sounds reasonable. So with the references in place like that, I can actually have an intelligent discussion with my student or my co-authors, because I get in the swing of understanding who's who in the field, whose names should be appearing in the references. Okay, I get some idea of how up-to-date the field is. I have some idea whether it really is relevant to have a 2003 reference, or whether it shouldn't be a 2023 or 2022 reference. All of that I can do if you discuss your manuscript with me in this format. Okay. Once the manuscript is 100% finalized, click on the button. All of that will change to numbered style. So some students, are under the mistaken impression that they're being more scientific by referencing the Vancouver style numbers as they go. Right, not true at all. Now we're about to run out of time, but this is important. So let me carry on. If everybody has to leave, it's understood. Let's remind ourselves of purposes of references in a paper. What are they? Well, what is the purpose? I often ask my students, I don't know that any one of them has ever been able to give me what I regard as the 4 purposes of references. And yet they are referencing left, right, and center and very, very madly, but apparently without actually understanding what the references are for. Now, this is the absolute worst. Okay, and I've actually come across some master's students who seem to think that we put references in because we have to have them. And it doesn't matter how crappy the references are. Sometimes they're all just web pages found on Google. This is meant to be a scientific article. Or some others seem to think it's just there for decoration, again, because it looks pretty. Obviously nonsense. Here are what I regard as the 4 most important reasons. There's a reference back to 1937. It's giving credit It's ascribing ownership of an idea or result or whatever it is to the person who deserves the credit. Okay. If you said Porphyrio has been described as the little imitator, gift 2023. Now, may have been known to have said that too, but not because I dreamt it up. It's because I read it from Waldenstrom, who said it in 1937. So it's actually not fair to put gift 2023 as that reference. Okay, it's giving me credit for what somebody else said. Right. Here's the second one. This is the one we use most. It's the factual support. It's the facts from the literature that provide supportment for the statement you're making, the way science is built up. Everything based on a foundation of what is already known already. So you are providing these references as illustrative of the fact, okay, that this is more or less known. Okay, that's up to you, therefore, to choose good references, believable references, and not any old fool who said whatever they like. Okay, you're providing support for a statement. And when a student brings that to me, I interrogate those references very, very, very carefully. Okay, because that is your justification for that statement. And if they're bad articles or misquoted articles or articles that the student hasn't even read, well, then I'm seriously concerned. That's like the Bible, building your house on sand instead of on rock. The whole thing is going to come tumbling down. Third purpose of a paper, of a reference. Factors determining the mean height of a population have been recently reviewed. It's providing further information. Okay, it's providing a service to your readers in terms of pointing them to something which will provide a way into the literature for anyone wishing to know more. Okay, so Ndlovu is not going to tell us all about those factors. He's going to, this author is not going to talk about all of those factors. He's going to refer us to Ndlovu's paper, who has done so. And here's the fourth one. We examined the bone density of subjects falling 2 standard deviations above the mean using the method of Singh and Banjal. Now, we don't have to go describing the method in full. Anybody who wants to know how we did it can go and look up Singh and Banjal's paper, and there they will see the method described. Now, we may wish to summarize it quickly or something in this paper, but the point is we don't have to go and describe it exhaustively because somebody else has already done it. So we can save ourselves an awful lot of ink and space in our manuscript by referring the reader to where they can read it up somewhere else without having to write it all out ourselves. So there are 4 very good reasons to put references in a paper. But as I've alluded to already, it's absolutely essential that you select the right references. And a good reviewer and a good examiner is very tuned into this and knows that a good student provides good references and a weak student, or worse still, a lazy student, provides wrong references. Right, so here are some common errors in referencing. First one I come across all the time, not referencing the things that need reference. So I find statements, and I say that's a very important statement, but where's the reference to back it up? Okay, if you want to state, okay, women typically are more emotionally intelligent than men. Good luck to you. But if you want to make a sweeping statement like that, I expect to see references, credible references that I can go and follow and make sure that it really is the belief of the field that women are more emotionally intelligent than men. Don't want just your word for it. Okay. Statements that need to be supported, work that needs to be credited to someone. useful references, sections that could be replaced by a reference to another publication. All of those are opportunities for you to put in references. And if I don't see them there, I suspect that there are references missing. Another common one is substandard references. Okay? Choosing the first reference that pops up on Google Scholar or PubMed. Okay? Instead of choosing the highest quality, most informative, most authoritative, and most up-to-date references. So it always becomes a balance. Will you quote the newer papers or the older, better papers? Will you quote somebody who quotes the authorities, or will you quote the authorities themselves? And so on, and so on. Right. Okay. So there may not be a right or a wrong here. It has been conclusively shown that form follows function and there's a reference. Which would be the better reference? An older one in Nature, the world's foremost scientific journal, or something in a journal that we've never heard of and seems to have a very, very limited impact. No, it's not even the Journal of Korean Medical Sciences. It's the journal of presumably some medical association in one city in Korea, which is actually the one that we want to quote. At the very least, we should have read both and see if we are doing anybody any favor by referring them to Lansi Tong's article rather than to the Nature article 7 years previously. And the next common problem is missing the most relevant references. And this is a sure way to bias the reviewer or the examiner against you. It's very poor style, you know, in the sense of the English idiom. Very poor style, my man. I'm not talking about the style of your writing. It's what the English would say, it's not cricket. Okay, missing the most relevant references. Why? Poor search style, too little effort, not keeping up with recent publications, or just being non-critical, not adequately assessing, comparing the strengths of the cited papers and deciding which are the ones that are most relevant. All of those suggest a failure in doctorateness, okay? Somebody who's not really ready to be given that red gown. This is the sort of statement you see, okay? I was surprised to see the statement referenced a rather obscure paper dated to 2014, when recognized authorities in the field have written extensively on this in the last 2 years. See, for example, Jones et al. 2021. If the right reviewers and the right examiners have been chosen, they do know the literature. And they will pick up immediately that here's somebody who doesn't really understand the field and isn't really keeping up with the literature, because they know which references they would put in if they were writing your paper. So they can see immediately when the ones you have chosen to put in are second best, third best, or even just a very poor excuse for a reference. Here's another error, a horrible one, and I see it often, misrepresenting a reference. So somebody has written, it's known that psoriasis is particularly common in patients with pre-existing atopy. They provided references 3, 6, 7, and 8. When I go and have a look, I find that reference 7 is a paper which in fact said the opposite. Okay. Or I might find that paper 7 has got nothing to do with the topic. Okay. It was just a review of psoriasis, but it didn't mention atopy. Okay. This is the mistake that happens commonly when people reference other people's references. In other words, you don't read the reference yourself. You just notice that some other paper used it as a reference. So you just insert it in your paper as a reference as well. But it's the old toy telephone system. Along the way, the meaning has become altered, misrepresented. So it happens when you don't read the paper at all, or when you don't read it carefully enough, or when you've only read the abstract, And worse still, of course, is confirmation bias. You wanted it to say that there was no association with atopy. You skimmed through it, you saw psoriasis, you saw atopy, so you just assumed that it was saying there's no association, that there's an association. In fact, it said the opposite. Right. And then probably the worst of all, because this is really scientific misconduct, is misrepresenting the current state of knowledge through biased selection of references. So somebody writes, extensive experience suggests that intelligence correlates with height. Rah, rah. 20 references. They have totally failed to mention another 45 papers which found the opposite because it didn't suit their purposes. They also have made no allowances for the fact that of those 20 papers, numbers 1 to 7 were based on tiny samples, making the conclusions very doubtful. 8 to 12 were poor papers that didn't control for confounders. 13 to 15 used very dubious methods. 16 to 19 were published in obscure foreign language journals, and you just read the English translation in square brackets provided by PubMed. 20 could not be replicated, etc., etc. Now that is completely dishonest. It is scientific misconduct. So my final slide, what do you need in order to reference well? Well, the better you understand the field, the better your referencing will be. The deeper your knowledge, the broader your knowledge of the field, the deeper your concept of what's going on, and the more you will instinctively realize that this is a good reference. This is a good reference for my purposes. This is a good reference, but not for this purpose. This is a poor reference. Okay? Thematic thinking, the ability to put forward a scientific argument. We want to make a strong scientific argument, which means it's based on strong foundations, which means strong references, and not any old reference to the say old Journal of Medical Sciences. Obviously, it needs regular visits to the literature to remain updated. A well-known error is reading the literature, spending 2 years writing your thesis without looking at the literature, and the examiner picks up immediately that all your references are 2 years old, at least. Okay. A good search strategy. We're not talking today about literature searching, but it's absolutely essential. And by the way, Dr. Cyrilla Ramklas waved a poster for me, at me today, to point out that the library is apparently now offering, at this time, a series of seminars on all the skills you need for searching the literature through the library, etc. So I don't have it with me. Presumably it was sent out on the emails. Please get it and make use of it. Right. The ability to evaluate the papers you encounter, decide which is good and which is not, and just an open, curious mind, including a mind that is prepared to change its mind. Okay? You may have felt all along that A is true. You need to have the ability, as you read the papers, to start becoming less and less sure about A, until eventually admitting that you've actually now changed your mind and you believe that B is the truth. Right. A few minutes overtime. Sorry for that. And thank you very much for joining us. I'm online just a bit longer for any questions or chats or anything else.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you, Prof. Well, I just want to ask, will the recording be shared with us?
Well, I think so. They have been put on YouTube, and I hope it will. I'm sort of not in charge of that. Okay. We have got a slight problem. I've discovered that this voiceover, that this PowerPoint thing I inserted, ballooned the size of the PowerPoint file by a factor of 10 or something like that. We may run into a little problem with that. We'll have to find out. Okay, then bye-bye, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Bye-bye, Prof.
It was.